Imagine casting your vote for a candidate, only to watch them hand ultimate power to the opposing party just months later.
Yeah, it completely shatters that basic contract between a voter and a politician. You think you understand the math of the legislature, right? And then suddenly, boom, everything flips over a single signature.
Right. And right now, there's this massive political earthquake unfolding in North Carolina, and it has the potential to reshape the entire landscape of the state. We are tracking a situation that is moving really fast. Two state lawmakers, Carla Cunningham and Nasif Majeed, just dropped their Democratic Party affiliations.
Wow.
Yeah, they officially registered as independents, and the immediate stakes here are just incredibly high.
Well, because of the current numbers in the state legislature,
Yeah.
you know. The Republicans desperately want to bypass the Democratic governor's vetoes. And to do that, they need a supermajority.
Right, they need a specific number of bodies in the room voting their way. And by walking away from the Democratic Party, Cunningham and Majeed potentially give Republicans the exact administrative shift they need to override the governor on almost anything. So for this deep dive, our mission is to explore the massive, high-stakes consequences of political party switching.
Yeah, we're going to look at the intense backlash from party leadership, and we'll break down a radical new bill designed to trap politicians who try to flip sides midterm.
It is basically a perfect case study of modern political survival.
Oh, absolutely. It shows us what happens when individual lawmakers collide with their own party machine.
Let's start with the timeline, because people don't usually just abandon their political home on a random Tuesday, you know? I was looking through the March 2026 primary election data, and it wasn't just a tough race for these two. It was a complete bloodbath.
Oh, for sure.
Like, Nasif Majeed lost his primary to a challenger named Valeria Levy, and he only pulled 26% of the vote compared to her 68%.
I mean, that is a staggering margin. When you look at incumbent politicians, people who already hold the seat, who have the name recognition, they almost never lose by those margins, not unless something systemic works against them.
Right. And Carla Cunningham's numbers were even worse. She lost her primary to Reverend Rodney Sadler by a 50-point margin.
Wait, 50 points?
Yeah. In a state legislative race, that translates to a loss of about 5,000 votes. And losing by 5,000 votes in a local district means someone actively destroyed your base.
Well, and that someone was their own party.
Exactly.
These defeats were not accidents or natural shifts in voter sentiment. They were orchestrated. The party apparatus essentially threw its weight behind the challengers, starved the incumbents of support, and actively campaigned to remove them from office.
So I really want to look at the why here. The core issue traces back to their voting records. North Carolina has a Democratic governor, Josh Stein, and the legislature is controlled by Republicans.
Right. So the governor's veto is the only shield the Democrats have against Republican legislation. But to uphold a veto, the Democrats need total loyalty. If even one or two Democrats cross the aisle, the Republicans can override the governor.
And that is exactly the line Cunningham and Majeed crossed. They occasionally voted with Republicans to override Governor Stein's vetoes. They basically acted as swing voters on specific issues.
Yeah.
It feels a bit like, well, like getting fired from your corporate job because you kept helping the rival company close deals, so you just decided to become a freelancer.
That's a great analogy. You help the competition, so your boss locks you out of the building.
Right. But honestly, if you look at it from the party's perspective, I mean, don't they have a point? If voters elect a Democrat, shouldn't they expect that person to support the Democratic agenda? The D next to the name is essentially a brand promise.
Well, yeah, that is the fundamental argument from party loyalists. The party argues that a candidate benefits from the infrastructure, the funding, and the voter data that the party provides.
Makes sense.
In exchange, the party expects you to defend the governor's veto. When you break that line, you compromise the entire party's power structure, so they feel entirely justified in pushing out members who break ranks.
But the way they pushed them out was wildly aggressive. I mean, this wasn't just some quiet backroom maneuvering. Governor Stein actually got directly involved. The highest-ranking Democrat in the state publicly endorsed the challengers running against his own sitting lawmakers.
Having a sitting executive intervene in a legislative primary is a massive escalation. It sends a really chilling message to every other lawmaker in the building. Basically, if you compromise with the opposition, the governor will personally try to end your career.
And Cunningham fired right back. I read the quotes she gave to the press, and she didn't hold anything back. She said Stein's endorsement was purely about power.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she used this incredibly sharp language, claiming the party's attitude was basically, if you don't do what we tell you to do, we're going to kick you off the plantation.
Using that specific historical metaphor really shows just how bitter and deeply personal this rift became. She is describing a party leadership that demands absolute obedience and punishes any independent thought.
Majeed had pushed back hard, too. He argued that his opponents ran a campaign of misinformation, like misleading the voters about his actual record. He framed his decision to leave as a way to shed political constraints so he could just focus on working families.
So from the perspective of Cunningham and Majeed, they view themselves as independent thinkers who are being punished for trying to serve their constituents rather than a strict partisan ideology.
Right. They see themselves as the victims of a rigid machine.
Exactly.
The reactions from the state's political leaders were like a split-screen reality depending on which side of the aisle you look at. Republican House Speaker Destin Hall immediately put out a statement praising both lawmakers. He commended their integrity and applauded them for putting their constituents first.
Well, the Republicans are obviously thrilled. I mean, they just gained a massive tactical advantage without having to spend a dime on an election. Praising their integrity is a smart way to welcome them into the fold.
Meanwhile, the North Carolina Democratic Party chair, Anderson Clayton, posted a much different sentiment. She literally wrote on social media, "Don't let the door hit ya where the good Lord split ya."
Ouch. That is a stunningly blunt dismissal. The Democratic leadership clearly prefers a smaller, totally unified voting bloc over a slightly larger group that contains unpredictable swing voters.
They view the loss of these two members as cutting out an infection, basically. Though it's worth noting that walking away isn't the only path a defeated moderate can take. I saw that another Democrat, Shelley Willingham, also lost his primary.
Oh, right.
Yeah, he frequently gets grouped with Cunningham and Majeed as a moderate who sometimes crosses party lines. But he didn't drop his affiliation.
Yeah, he chose a totally different strategy. Willingham stated publicly that his philosophy and his style of representation will remain exactly the same, no matter what letter is next to his name.
Interesting.
So he decided to just stay in the party and finish his term as a Democrat. He proves that not every lawmaker who gets bruised by the party machine decides to burn the bridge on their way out.
But Cunningham and Majeed did burn that bridge, and that creates an immediate, terrifying math problem for the Democrats. Let's break down the actual balance of power in the North Carolina legislature right now.
Well, the math is very straightforward, and it heavily favors the Republicans. Currently, Republicans hold a supermajority in the state Senate.
And just as a reminder, a supermajority means they control enough seats to override a governor's veto purely along party lines.
Right. They don't need a single Democratic vote in the Senate to pass whatever they want.
But the House of Representatives is a different story. Before Cunningham and Majeed switched to independent, the Republicans were exactly one seat shy of a supermajority in the House.
Just one seat.
Just one seat stood between the governor's veto having teeth and the governor's veto being completely useless.
Which means the power dynamic rests entirely on these two newly minted independents. If either Cunningham or Majeed decides to vote with the Republicans on a party line bill, the GOP hits that supermajority threshold.
Assuming every Republican shows up and votes, yes, they bypass Governor Stein entirely.
And we know this isn't just a theoretical threat. I dug into their bipartisan voting records, and they have a history of handing Republicans victories on highly controversial bills.
Oh, yeah. Like last July, Cunningham was the deciding vote to override a veto on House Bill 318. That was a major piece of legislation requiring state sheriffs to cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE.
Yeah, she provided the crucial crossover vote on a cornerstone Republican immigration issue. And Majeed has a similar track record.
Really?
Also in July, he was the only Democrat in the entire House to vote with the GOP to override a veto on House Bill 805, which dealt with preventing sexual exploitation of women and minors.
Wow. They also both teamed up last year to override the governor's veto on a massive energy bill that changed how power is priced across the state. They have absolutely no problem breaking ranks.
And that is exactly why the Democratic leadership is sweating right now. There are currently 7 vetoed bills just sitting on the calendar in the short legislative session, waiting for an override vote.
7 pieces of legislation that the governor rejected, waiting to see if Cunningham or Majeed will provide the kill shot.
And one of those bills is Senate Bill 153. This is another major immigration bill that forces state agencies, like the Highway Patrol, to collaborate with IC.
The wild thing about Senate Bill 153 is that Cunningham actually opposed it in the past.
Right.
During previous debates, she voted no.
Oh, interesting.
But now that she's untethered from the Democratic Party and serving out her final session after a brutal primary defeat, her future vote is a total wild card.
It creates incredible suspense on the legislative floor. One person who was just publicly fired by her own party now holds the fate of state policy in her hands.
I mean, she has no political future to protect and no party boss to answer to.
Exactly. But the Democrats aren't just reacting to Cunningham and Majeed. They are operating from a place of deep political trauma because this exact scenario played out just a few years ago.
Right. If we look back at April 2023, State Representative Tricia Cotham pulled a move that completely shocked the state. She switched her affiliation midterm, leaving the Democrats to join the Republicans.
The Cotham switch fundamentally altered North Carolina's legal landscape. When she flipped, she handed the GOP a permanent supermajority.
And the Republicans immediately used that newly acquired power to enact strict new abortion restrictions. They overrode the veto of the Democratic governor at the time, Roy Cooper, and pushed the legislation through.
So the Democrats already lived through the nightmare scenario. They know exactly how much damage a single defection causes. They watched Tricia Cotham rewrite state law in 2023, and now they're watching Cunningham and Majeed add you toward that same cliff.
Which explains why they can't just sit around and hope it doesn't happen again. They are trying to build a firewall.
Yes, the political system is actively trying to invent a mechanism to protect itself from unpredictable politicians. 3 state senators, Garrett, Batch, and Salvador, proposed a radical new bill in March 2025 called the Voter Fraud Prevention Act.
I find that title fascinating. Calling it the Voter Fraud Prevention Act implies that a politician changing their label midterm is essentially defrauding the public.
Well, that is the exact philosophical argument underpinning the bill. Senate Bill DRS 35238 MCE 108 argues that voters elect a platform, not just a personality.
Oh, I see.
If you bait the voters with one platform and switch to another after taking office, you have committed a fraud against the electorate.
The mechanics of this bill are brutal. It is designed to make flipping sides financially and logistically painful. If a lawmaker changes their party affiliation with more than 6 months left in their term, a 3-step penalty kicks in automatically.
How so?
So, step 1 is instant termination. Their office is immediately deemed vacated.
Wow. You lose your seat the second you file the paperwork. You are no longer a sitting lawmaker.
Right. And then step 2, that automatic vacancy triggers a mandatory special election, and the state must hold that election within 90 days of the party switch.
Which is a logistical nightmare for the state, but an absolute disaster for the politician. 90 days is an impossibly short time to spin up a new campaign, print signs, and rally voters.
Especially because you have to do it without the backing of the party machine you just abandoned.
Right. The State Board of Elections handles the administrative burden and reimburses the counties, but the politician is suddenly left fighting for their political life in a 3-month sprint.
And then step 3 hits them directly in the wallet. This is the part that really reveals the strategy. Under this bill, any donor from your last election cycle can demand their campaign contribution back, and the lawmaker has exactly 30 days to issue that refund.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's essentially a political prenup. If you decide to walk away from the marriage midterm, you're paying for the divorce out of your own pocket.
That is wild. So consider the mechanism at play here. The bill forces you into a desperate 90-day snap election. But first, it gives your angry former donors 30 days to completely drain your campaign bank account.
Exactly. It is designed to bankrupt defecting politicians right before forcing them onto the ballot.
And if we look at the preamble of the bill, the sponsors justify these extreme measures by pointing to a very specific statistic about voter disenfranchisement.
Right.
The authors note that maintaining voter confidence is the foundation of a free democracy. They cite a statistic from the 2022 general election, where 25,986 votes were cast for a North Carolina legislator who then switched their party affiliation less than 6 months into the term.
That is almost 26,000 people who stood in line, checked a box for a specific party vision, and then watched their representative hand that vote to the opposing side.
Yeah, the bill's sponsors argue that those 26,000 voters had their voices erased. The Voter Fraud Prevention Act aims to ensure that if a politician changes their core political identity, the voters immediately get the power to decide if they still support that person.
It takes the power away from the politician and hands it back to the district.
Exactly. It really highlights a profound tension at the heart of our system. On one hand, you have Carla Cunningham and Nasif Majeed, 2 lawmakers who lost massive primary elections because they occasionally compromised with the opposing party.
Right. They faced intense hostility from their own leadership, got pushed out, and became independents.
And in doing so, they fundamentally altered the power structure of the entire state, giving Republicans the exact mathematical advantage they need to bypass the governor and pass their own laws.
Meanwhile, the party left behind is trying to write strict new laws to punish anyone who ever tries to pull a move like that again. It shows just how fragile these legislative majorities really are. A single person changing their mind can alter the fate of millions of citizens.
It forces us to ask what we actually value in a representative. Do we want a loyal soldier who never breaks the party line? Or do you want an independent thinker who evaluates every bill on its own merits, even if it means betraying the platform?
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. If political parties continue to punish lawmakers for bipartisan compromise, will the future of politics just be a battle of rigid extremes where independent thinkers simply have no place to survive?